In a timely and frankly long overdue commentary about South Africa's myopic, failed foreign policy, former Democratic Alliance Party leader and ambassador to Argentina, Tony Leon, wrote an op ed published at News 24 titled Ubuntu in Question: South Africa's Silence on Sudan and Ethiopia's Crises.
Welcome back once again. This is Chris Report, and he assured me that since I'm in town in Boulders, folks, this is Chris Wyatt reporting from South Africa.
Now, in the op-ed, Ambassador Leon writes, a search of South African government websites for an expression of sympathy on the weekend assassination of 6 civilian hostages who were killed by Hamas under the tunnels of Rafah and Gaza yields a nil return. This begs a question. Why? Well, I would argue it's because of the bigotry and blind loyalty of the ANC to the Palestinian cause, which trumps all reason. The ANC does not care that the lives snuffed out were innocent humans, as they were not our people. This callous inhumanity is consistent in ANC foreign policy. Leon continues, cogent explanations for the dearth of empathy or its partial application must go beyond the normal claims of whataboutism. Well, indeed it must, as this is not whataboutism, but rather a pattern of intentional hypocrisy when it comes to human rights and condemnation. The ANC is only ever upset about black and brown when they presume they can pin it on the evil white folks, whether that is at home in South Africa or elsewhere. But when black and brown folks are the culprits, there's no frantic rush to the International Court of Justice, no demands for international criminal court action at all. Now, I welcome Ambassador Leon's commentary. Someone with stature, influence, and gravitas needs to address this head on. Perhaps now, finally, folks will begin to pay attention to the point that I have long made over several years, that the ANC does not stand for human rights and freedom. Now, the party may once have had such values. If it did in 2024, that is ancient history. This is a party that is about itself and for its caters, no one else. A party that is far too comfortable race hustling and blaming others for its own failures. Distraction is an art form, one the ANC seeks to perfect. Leon continues, in theory, since 1994, South Africa has, in its projection to the world, aimed at a far more expansive, generous, and universal idea of foreign policy founded on the principle of Ubuntu. This foundation would inform the quest for no less than the creation of a better Africa and a better world. Well, Tony, that's the narrative anyway. In practice, the ANC has comprehensively failed to live up to these standards. He adds, Brett Stevens penned a column in the New York Times headline, "Can we be a little less selective with our moral outrage?" He pointed out the loud demands for a ceasefire in Gaza, incidentally echoed by many citizens in Israel who are entirely free to dissent from the government line there. He ranged against this one cause consuming so much of the world's energies was the blanket of silence that comforted some of the world's worst abusers, allowing them from China to Venezuela, Iran, and Russia to proceed largely unnoticed and unhindered. No, folks, South Africa is not with the angels on any of these important geopolitical issues, but rather the friend and fellow traveler with tyrants, despots, human rights abusers, and war criminals. And in fact, these other countries do get away with the horrors they inflict on their own populations. Let's just bring a few things back to remind folks where the ANC really stands. The African National Congress refused to arrest Omar Bashir in 2015, despite being a signatory to the Rome Statute. Now, we can argue about the legitimacy of the ICC's warrant. Sudan was not a signatory, but not the obligation of South Africa to deny him entry into the country or to arrest him on arrival, which it failed to do. Now, moving forward to the COVID era, despite having a robust domestic pharmaceutical industry, neither Cyril Ramaphosa or the ANC government did anything to foster COVID vaccine development or to participate in development trials with US or UK firms that produced them. Rather, he fobbed off the tax to the corrupt and ineffective UN-run COVAX scheme. For months, he ran around screaming to the world, vaccine apartheid, vaccine apartheid, vaccine apartheid, poisoning international relations and creating social division rather than leading the way for Africa. Ambassador Leon says that South Africa has not noticed or hindered any of those predatory rulers or abusers, has evidenced much comment previously, and needs no further interrogation here. Well, in fact, it does need interrogation here. And I'm glad that you are raising the issue that I've been raising endlessly. He continues, Pretoria's moral mindedness and expenditure of most of its attention and precious resources on Gaza is on a place where we have little influence and limited reach. Black Lives Matter should not be a slogan du jour on American campuses. Rather, it is meant to be a foundation stone of our foreign policy. But in our own foreign policy backyard, again, you will search in vain for a single coherent action, step, or useful idea for addressing the dire and deathly situation in either Sudan or Ethiopia. Spot on. All blather, no action. Now, one must ask the question, why? Also, the oodles of overpaid and useless university lecturers overpopulating the indoctrination centers in South Africa, once known as universities, who sit around and dream up moronic concepts like calling the appellation Africa a racial slur. Why are they silent and therefore complicit in the ANC's hypocrisy? Ambassador Leon is referring to the nearly 6 million Sudanese who are at risk of starvation owing to the conflict in Sudan. These are voices that fall on deaf ears at Latuli House. Black Lives Matter. Bullshit. They don't matter to the ANC. We can also say the same thing about Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, Somalia, Myanmar, China, Ukraine. Take your pick. The ANC's selective outrage is epic. It's legion. And it's time for academics and policymakers and diplomats to begin calling out the ANC and quit giving them free pass. The Rainbow Nation concept of 1994 has been dead for decades. The ANC is a corrupt party. Even though it's in a government national unity, it remains a corrupt party that is out for itself and its caters, not for South Africans, not for brown people, not for black people, and certainly not for white people. Shame on them as Sudanese, Somalis, Nigerians, Nigerians, Burkinabes, Malians, Uyghurs, Ukrainians, and Burmese are butchered, murdered, their human rights and dignity stripped from them. Where is the ANC? Where is the ANC indeed?